Hi everyone, this is Michał from Airhead, and today we'll go through the most recent questions from operational procedures or OPS for the ATPL theory. All questions that you'll see have been seen in the past 30 days in actual EASA exams across all of the authorities. So let's jump into the first question. In the context of low visibility operations, what is meant by the term flight control system? So remember that low visibility operations are the ones where the RVR is below 550 meters. However, you will require specific approval only below 400 meters of RVR on the runway in use. Also remember that these operations will be varying depending on the operator and specific approvals that they got. So it will never be all straightforward. However, if you are departing in low visibility situation, then always remember that you have to select a destination or a takeoff alternate, where after takeoff you're able to safely land with the applicable minima if the weather is not good enough at your takeoff airport. However, going back to the question, what is meant by the flight control system? So when you are performing low visibility operations or landings down to Cat 1, 2, or 3 minima, then most of the systems will require you to have an appropriate autopilot or automatic flight system. There are two of the kinds that you have to know for the exam purposes. These are fail operational and fail passive. Fail operational systems are the ones that in case of the autopilot fails, there is an abundant system that does the same thing, that ensures that below certain altitude or height, the landing can be completed still using the automatic systems. A flight passive will mean that in case of a failure, the landing has to be aborted unless there is a supporting hybrid system such as the HUD or synthetic vision displays, which will allow the pilots, pending special approvals, to continue the approach. So a flight control system will be a system. It can be fail passive, are excluded from the term. That is not correct. There are fail passive and fail operational, and a system that is capable of performing a fail operational type of automatic landing, and this will be the correct answer. Now going into question number 2. Following a decompression at flight level 320, which should be the first steps? Inform the ATC, start descent, or don the masks. So of course, when the decompression happens at high altitudes, the time of useful consciousness is very short. And at some altitudes, it will be around the 20 to 30 second mark. So it's extremely important to first don the masks to get the appropriate oxygen levels flowing for the crew not to become incapacitated. So of course, for all these questions, donning the masks will always be the first thing the crew should do. However, I know this question can be slightly confusing because there were two questions of very similar wording that will have different answers. So for these questions, of course, number 3 is the correct first step, which is donning the masks. In this case, this leaves no question for other options as they all start with different numbers. However, you may ask, why do we inform the ATC first rather than descent first? So, of course, first thing we need to do is to get the oxygen flowing to prevent incapacitation. Then we need to descend, but we need to make sure the descent is safe. In case the decompression is happening rapidly, then the first thing we do is descend to prevent the decompression sickness. However, if the rapid decompression is not stated in a question, make sure that you always first contact the ATC and then start your descent. And for these questions, also remember that the descent should be made to around the 10,000 feet mark. And also, if you're flying above 10,000 feet, you will always require oxygen unless you're flying for less than 30 minutes below a flight level 130. If you're flying above 13,000 feet, you'll always need supplemental oxygen if your cabin is unpressurized. Question number 3. If a crew member reports for duty at 5:35, their first departure occurs at 6:35, and the maximum duty period for the day is stated to be 12 hours 45 minutes, what time should the aircraft be back on stand, and how late can this be extended using the commander's discretion? So of course, remember that your duty period starts the moment you report for duty and not when you take off. It also ends the moment that your duty finishes, not when you land. And the maximum duty period in general in aviation is at the 13-hour mark. However, it changes, and you can read all of this in EASA's Part Auto, depending on the time when the crew shows up to the airport and whether it's the window of circadian low or not, and also on the amount of sectors that you're flying. Usually this will be around 30 minutes. In this case, the maximum duty period is stated to be 12 hours, 45 minutes. However, I actually believe this is incorrect, as if you are reporting for duty at 5:35, it should be 12 hours and 30 minutes. However, following this, we have to answer the question when we can be expected to finish the duty, which will be from the reporting time, so 12 hours for 45 plus 5:35. This will be 18:20. And then how much can it be extended? By law, the duty period can be extended by 1 hour by the operator and for 2 hours by the commander, and this is his discretion, and this can be stretched to 3 hours if the crew is augmented. However, in this case, we have to consider the standard 2-hour extension, as no other facts are mentioned, so we can extend the crew the time of duty by 2 hours on commander's discretion. Question number 4 is about circling. So a circling is a type of an approach that is an IFR approach that has its last segment when you have visual of the runway, and then you can make a circle, kind of like joining a pattern after breaking from the clouds or gaining visibility with the runway. Remember that a straight-in approach is considered when you are plus minus 30 degrees from the runway centerline, and for a straight-out departure will be plus minus 15 degrees. So there are some questions that I will ask you about these numbers. However, for the approaches, it will be plus minus 30. Anything beyond that limit will need to be considered circle to land. And circle to land usually will be made if you're trying to land on a runway that, for example, will not have an IFR procedure or a published chart. So you will make an approach to a runway that has the procedure or a chart, and then join the runway. So you brake at the appropriate height, which will be stated in the plate. You join the downwind and perform a visual maneuver. So this will be the final phase of a visual circuit and landing. It's not a circuit and landing. The visual phase of an instrument approach to bring an aircraft into position for landing on a runway that is not suitably located for a straight-in approach. That is correct. Some runways will actually have the approach published with the nav aids of putting the aircraft up to 90 degrees angle from the runway. So in that case, once you have the visuals with the runway, you will just join the circuit and visually land down. This will be considered circle to land. And you'll do this if the runway has no nav aids or if the wind doesn't permit you to land because you have a tailwind. So you'll go into the second one to land with a appropriate headwind. This is quite popular in aviation, and I'm sure that you'll learn this technique quite well during your flight school. And then lastly, question number 5. Which of the following situations could lead the pilot of a light aircraft carrying out a precautionary landing? So there are 2 types of landings that you'll need to remember, which is a forced landing and precautionary landing, and also there's something called PFL, which is practiced forced landing, which you'll do many times during your flight training. So a precautionary landing is a landing where everything is relatively okay with the aircraft, there is no imminent danger, and you can still fly it. The difference between a forced landing is where you don't really have a choice whether you can or cannot land. So think about precautionary landing is when you have low fuel, the night is approaching, you are lost, you don't know what's going on, maybe there are some weird sounds with the engine, so the engine is still working, but something is clearly wrong. This is when you would perform a precautionary landing, which is made during the nearest aerodrome, nearest airport on the fastest availability for landing, essentially. So if you're in a long course country and you feel something is wrong, you can make a precautionary landing to the nearest airport. Forced landing is when something goes completely wrong and you don't have a choice, such as an engine failure or complete fuel starvation. So in this case, the precautionary landing will be deterring whether failure of primary controls. Well, you don't really have a choice in that case. Fuel shortage, deteriorating weather, or approaching darkness, yes, as there is nothing wrong happening just yet, but it's better to be on the ground than in the air. Of course, total engine failure would be considered a forced landing, and total electric failure or fire also doesn't give you a choice. So for this, remember, precautionary landing is you are making a choice to land. A forced landing, you are forced to land. And this will be everything for today. Thank you very much for joining, and I hope to see you in the next video where we'll cover different subjects and the most recent questions. Have a great day, and good luck with your studies. Bye-bye.